Hi there, my name's Travis Gutzmer. I'm a police officer for the City of Watertown with the Police Department. I'm currently assigned as a school resource officer. And we're here today, we're gonna talk a little bit about vapes, right? Vaping, what they are, how it works, what you vape, and some of the consequences that can come along with that. You can see I'm putting gloves on right now. That's just for my own protection. These devices can and often do leak and can contaminate the device and whoever touches them with the e-liquid or juice that is loaded into them. So I don't want to absorb any of that into my skin, so I'm going to put gloves on to protect that as I talk to you guys and handle these devices. So we'll start out just very basic of what is a vape, what is the device itself. I'm going to grab one of the big ones just because it's a little easier to see. But they all have very basic components that are all the same. Whether it's one of these big ones or one of these small ones, they all have the same components in some version that make them work in a very similar fashion. So the main thing is they have to have a battery or a power source. They have to have something that powers them. They can be a sealed battery that is not rechargeable, or they can be a rechargeable battery to power the device and the heating element. So this particular model uses two batteries that are actually this size. So that's a 3.7 volt lithium battery that powers these. Okay, there's two of them in this device. That's a pretty substantial power load in one of these units. But as compared to one of the smaller ones, it's not gonna have near as much capacity. But that's the battery source. That's the power source that makes that go. Also in here, you're gonna have a heating element that's gonna heat the liquid that is loaded into the device so that the user can then inhale off the device and breathe that aerosol product in. Notice I said aerosol and not vapor product. We're going to cover that a little bit more later. So those are the components. Battery, heating element, there's some sort of container or pod that holds the juice or the e-liquid, and then the mouthpiece. And there's sensors inside that make it all work together. Some have a manual button that you can push to start the device, but they also rely on a sensor that senses the airflow to trigger everything to make it all work instantaneously. The heat ranges in these are quite excessive depending on the device, but they exceed 200, 300, 400 degrees and plus when these devices are activated. So there's some potential hazard that can come along with that as well. So those are the basic elements and components of the vape. And it doesn't matter the size or the style, they're all in there. So the same elements are in all of these different kinds of devices, even though they're vastly different sized shapes. They're just built for special purposes and different effects, different user preferences on the end result. So let's talk about the liquid a little bit, okay? I've got some various liquids here. These are the refillable liquids that you can put into some of these devices. Some of these devices are refillable, some of them are not. Some of the devices you refill as a user, and some of them you have to buy replacement pods. One of the more common ones that kind of started the big the popularity with vaping was the Joules. And so these are Joule pods. They're color-coded by the little protective cap that indicates their flavor. And so you can see one of these is full and one of these is empty, but there is fluid in the darker colored one and no fluid in the one that's clear or transparent at this time. So these are Joule pods. What you would do with a Joule pod is you would use the Joule device. When it's empty, you take the pod out and you would discard it, replace it back in there, and then you're good to go. And you just have to manage the battery life by charging the Joule. So those are pod-based devices. There's many, many different brands. I only have a fraction of the variety that's out there. Views is another brand very similar to the Joule, probably a competitor, same type of system. You buy these Views pods from the retail store, and once they're gone, and you have to buy new ones. So those are the pod-based ones. We'll talk about the refillable liquid. So the ones on this side of the table are all refillable. There's different brands. This particular one's a Sorin, where you can actually pull the pod out. There's an access port that you can open and you would fill out of your bottle. These bottles have a small neck on them so that it's pretty pinpoint that you can get it into the pod and fill it up without spilling too much of it. So those are the more discreet ones. From there, there's more evolutions. This is just a sample of the variety and the brands that are out there. But this is a smoke, a Nord smoke here. You can refill this pod. It's fairly good sized, has a little bit more battery capacity in it, but still refillable. And we kind of move on up from these Orions, different size tanks, different size devices, and all the way up into the pod systems or the mod systems that have the larger refillable tanks on them. So you would take these and you'd fill this level or this tank full to the level with your liquid of your choosing, and that's how basically you refill them or reload them, whatever you prefer. So if we talk a little bit about the fluids themselves, I'll make sure these lids are on tight so I don't spill them. Marketing is huge on these, and it's marketed big with the flavors. I would have to think that they're targeting youth when they come up with these flavors. Kids aren't going to use something that tastes bad. And so if we look at some of these flavors, the big thing right now is nic salts. So nicotine, what they've done is they've made it a salt product. They've changed the pH value of it, and when it's a nicotine salt, it absorbs into your body faster, so you get a faster hit or a faster high off of it. And so many of these are nic salts. This one's Candy King on salt. It's a hard apple with a salt, so it's that sweet and salty type finish to it. Same idea here. This is just a different brand. Twist. So this is going to be a fruity flavored one with the salt. And then we have Aqua Salts, another brand. This one's labeled Rush. I don't know what Rush tastes like, and I'm not going to smell it, so that'll be a mystery. But right on many of these it says, warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. It's loud and proud on this one. It's not necessarily as big on other products, but somewhere the warning labels are on there. So if anyone is trying to fool you and say, Mom, Dad, no, it's just a harmless nicotine-free product, well, check the label, check the manufacturer and see. Flavor-wise, this is a blue slushy. This was super popular here not too long ago, and this is a very large container of it, so I suppose there's some bulk savings in buying a larger bottle, but that would refill these devices many, many, many times. Then again on this one, just a different brand, Taboo and grape cola flavored, just another variety. And then people wonder, or maybe the myth rather, is what's in this liquid? What is it? A lot of people have been fooled by marketing to believe that it's rather harmless, that vaping is just creating a water vapor that isn't going to do any damage, although it does have some nicotine in it. And that just simply is misinformed or miseducated people. This is an oil-based product. There's a couple different varieties that you can get it, but it's oil-based, so think of vegetable oil for a general consistency. We all know what that is and how it handles. So that's the general consistency. I don't know how well it'll show, but I mean, you can kind of see how it flows within the bottle there. But vegetable oil is a pretty good comparison. And so they take vegetable oil and then they put in all the additives and all the chemicals into it to achieve their desired result. And there are some different results that they go for depending on what they're trying to do. But The really dangerous ones that they put in there are the metal particles. There's vitamin E, acetate, and diacetyl, which are compounds that they've figured out have been really detrimental to lung health over the long term or even short term effects. And those are the concerning things. And honestly, you don't really know what's in this bottle. If you have the box, it would probably, I would assume it would tell you a little bit more than what's on the bottle, but it just has very general safety warnings on here about, if you're pregnant, you maybe shouldn't use this product. There's a Proposition 65 warning, which is the California warning saying chemicals in this can and are known to cause cancer. So, that might be a clue that it's not that good to consume. This one actually has the ingredients listed, but there's no percentage or anything like that. But it lists that it's kosher-grade vegetable glycerin, propylene glycol, flavorings, and nicotine. And salt is in parentheses behind that. So I don't know how many flavorings are in this bottle, and maybe they don't either. But that kind of tells you a little bit about the industry and how unregulated it is. The FDA does not, as far as I know, they do not have any approvals on any of this stuff that's in front of me. I know some of the major manufacturers are in the process of seeking FDA approval, but I don't believe anything has been finalized at this time. That includes the fluid that these users are vaping or smoking or ingesting into their bodies, into their lungs. And so that's kind of scary if you think about that. People are scared of drugs because they don't know what's in them, right? Someone's cooking meth and they're like, oh my gosh, they use household chemicals. Well, if you really break down the components of vape juice on a laboratory level, there's a lot of household chemicals in there and substances that are known when exposed to lung tissue to cause some serious ramifications to your health. And even scarier yet, I don't have an example of it, but you can bulk make your own liquid. And some vape shops have their own varieties and brands that they make in-house. And so in that scenario, there's I don't know if they have a title, if they're a e-liquid technician or what they are, if they just work at a vape store, but they would actually physically measure out the components, dump them together to make their batch of, whatever they name it, their own variety of blue slushy, if you will. And so they're literally taking components in bulk from 5-gallon pails. Hopefully they're measuring things out right. Hopefully they're getting the proper ratios in there and, labeling it as a blue slushy, for example. And then they say, hey, this is a 3%, a 4%, a 5% concentrated nicotine. And the user buys that really on the trust that they know what they're doing. And I don't know their qualifications. Maybe they are chemists. I don't know that, but I kind of doubt it. And that worries me a little bit. But the same thing could be happening at Aquasalt's lab. Wherever they're making this, it could just be untrained minimum wage workers. I don't know. And that's the trouble of it. Without being regulated, without FDA approval, you're really taking a gamble on a lot of these liquids and devices. And it's the user that bears all the risk. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the aerosol product that these devices produce once they're used. So once this liquid gets hot and it's vaporized, it becomes an aerosol product. We all know what aerosol products are. We have them in our house. We use them outside, protect ourselves from sun and bugs. So there's aerosol products everywhere in your house that you use. And if you really think about this, would you spray this into your lungs or would you breathe this in? I know when I've cleaned and you get a little bit too close and you get too much of that smell, it's unpleasant. So really think about that as a user of vapes and how bad that probably is. I'm not a doctor, but think about how bad that's got to be for your lungs. Your lungs are very delicate, very prone to injury when things are introduced to them that do not belong, specifically the lungs. Popcorn lung was a term that we heard a lot about. It was so severe that it prompted federal legislation. If you remember, the legislation that came out that bumped the federal age for tobacco products. It went to 21. South Dakota followed suit and adopted that change as well. And it did other things like limiting flavors of these products to remove that targeting of youth that was probably happening. So it was significant enough to prompt federal legislation to change those bad behaviors to help curb the injuries that were happening. And so there's a lot of people out there that there's been some reported deaths due to that, as well as many, many injuries. There's some people that are waiting for lung transplants now because of these vape products or products like them that were utilized. And I'm guessing if you talk to them, they probably wish they would maybe change their habits a little bit. And that's a scary deal. Transplanted lungs don't last forever. They have an expiration date on them. If you're lucky enough to get a transplant, the medical professionals say that they're only going to last you about 3 to 5 years, and it's a one-time replacement. You can't transplant lungs repeatedly, so it only buys you a little bit more time. And that's kind of scary if you think about it, because the average user in the CDC reported data is about 24 years old. Obviously there's some higher, some lower, but those experiencing the injuries came to that average of 24 years old. And that's pretty young to have such significant problems with an organ that you need that's so essential to everyday life. So that's just something that can happen to your lungs from these aerosols happening. So we'll talk a little bit about the devices. We've mentioned Joules in the past. And this is something that parents can really watch out for, especially if you're thinking maybe your kid's involved in some of this stuff, or you want to know more about it, or you just want to check in on them and make sure that they're not, if you're checking their bags, if you're checking their cars, just things to watch out for in their room, wherever. I'll kind of start chronologically from what I've seen in these trends, kind of where it started, how it ended, and where it's at now, I guess. But the big one is probably the Joule devices. This is a rechargeable device with a refill or a replaceable pod, okay? So you have to charge this device up. This is the actual charger right here. It's a USB device that plugs into a charger, a computer, whatever it is, and it's got a magnetic base in it. And so when you plug that into a computer or a charger, that's what it looks like. If this was plugged into a computer, it would look like a legit hardware piece of a computer. Most people wouldn't give it a second thought, right? But that's how it's recharged. When it is recharged, it just disconnects. They can easily store this charger and conceal this charger in many places. The pods, something to look for with the pods. If you see these empty pods laying around, that's your clue that somebody in the area is using a vape product. And next time you're at a store, look around in the parking lot. You'll see all this electronic waste from these e-cigarettes and vapes laying around. Just like you used to see cigarette butts, you're now starting to see these. You'll see these caps laying around, discarded, just on the ground, littered. You'll see these pods or cartridges, and it's just kind of a sad thing to see. But that's the Joule. Pop culture from there has evolved the device, of course, so you can actually modify and customize your device by putting a skin on it or a wrap. I have a couple that I came across in my work. This is, I don't know how well it shows, but we have a Joule with a depiction of Jesus on there. That was a pretty popular one for a while. And even pop culture, we have Post Malone as the Mona Lisa on this one. So, I mean, there's definitely some marketing going on to entice those young users, I think. From the Joule, there's kind of some competitors in the market. Views was kind of one of the big ones. Similar device to recharge it. This one's a little bit more obvious. It's got the charging cord on it. But it wouldn't necessarily draw your attention if you just saw this in your kid's room or their car. You'd be like, oh, it's for one of their devices or something like that. But same basic concept. It's magnetic. It connects to the base. It recharges the internal battery. They do have to, I should say, they're supposed to buy and replace these pods. They're not supposed to be refillable. But what's happened with these pods is they've learned how to hack them so they can pry open this once factory sealed pod, and they'll get their favorite bulk e-liquid and they'll fill it back up to use in these devices. I imagine that's a cost saving measure. Buying the pods pre-filled are probably more expensive than buying a jug of liquid to fill it up yourself. But again, you're altering a manufactured product beyond their specifications, so there's always that potential for, disaster to happen. So those were kind of the start. From there, I think the flavors and the appeal of the bulk liquid became more appealing to the users. And when I say users, I primarily work with youth, or so under 21 individuals. That makes this a status crime. Due to their age, they cannot possess, they can't use these, they can't sell them, all that stuff under South Dakota law. There are pen-based or cartridge-based ones. So these are both cartridge-based power sources, heating elements. And so you'd actually have, I don't have the cartridges that go in these because they're typically THC cartridges, and that would be the psychoactive component of marijuana. And so obviously if it's a drug that has to be destroyed and into evidence, I can't tote that around and show people, but it would just be a clear vial. It would have a threaded base on one end, a mouthpiece on the other, and you would just thread those in and use it till it's gone, recharge your device as needed. Same way with this is just the large one with the big battery. So these are basically the same thing. They take the same cartridge. One just has way more juice than this one. You can get nicotine-based carts that screw in, but the far more common one is the THC cartridges. A lot of times they come from the internet. It's online sales is how they're getting into communities. And it's a lot more prevalent than a lot of people think. So, and not just in the youth, adults obviously use these devices as well. Since we mentioned THC, we'll talk about that a little bit more. So you remember I told you that the regular e-liquid is basically vegetable oil based, right? So it flows like vegetable oil. Parents will sometimes talk to me and say, well, how do I know if my kid's putting THC or something in there? And the easiest way to tell is if you can look at the pod or the vial or whatever it is, the cartridge, and if you were to, invert it, move it around, and watch how it flows. So if it flows like vegetable oil, which we've probably all poured vegetable oil at some point in our lives, we know how that flows. THC doesn't flow that well. THC is going to flow, it's going to be a lot thicker product, and it's going to flow more like molasses or syrup would. So if you have that really slow syrup-like movement to the fluid, it's typically going to be darker in color. And a lot of the times, the THC, when it's in there, you may be able to smell the traditional marijuana type smell that's with it, along with the flavoring components. So it wouldn't smell exactly like traditional plant-based marijuana, but it may have some of those undertones in the product itself. A big giveaway, though, what we see in enforcement-wise is the screw-in cartridge style ones, primarily from what we've been seeing, have been THC-based. Don't always have to be, but that's what we're seeing more and more. And that brings us to disposables. Disposables are where we're at these days. It used to be kids were always worried about losing this Joule if they got caught because they'd have to spend another $30, $40 or more dollars on the black market to replace this thing, right? And that was very valuable to them. They would try to conceal this and hide it as much as they could in the chance that they didn't get it confiscated. But now disposables come on the market, and same with any of these. These were all fairly expensive when they were new, but now disposables are on the market. I've got just a variety of them. Now disposables are, much like you would think, they're single use in the aspect that once the liquid is gone or once the battery is dead, they're done for. There's nothing, you can't refill them, you can't recharge them, they're just done. Roughly speaking, a Joule pod is supposed to last 200 puffs. That was kind of the basis. And a Joule pod is supposed to be equivalent to a nicotine content of a pack of cigarettes. When we move into the disposables, things start to vary a lot. So I mean, there's just different brands. These are Nick sticks. We got strawberry and pineapple flavored. All you do to use it is you'd put your mouth on it and you'd inhale, and that airflow would trigger the sensor and the device would work. Just different brand, same concept. We have the Blow brand, we have a cherry, we have a strawberry. So again, doesn't really look like much. If this was in someone's makeup bag, maybe you wouldn't even notice it. If it's in a glove box, you might miss it. So it can kind of blend in. Another brand, this one's an Axe brand. Lush Ice is the flavor. This one just has an E and an S on it. I'm not even sure what brand that is. And then the Bitty sticks were super popular for a while. Jungle Juice is the flavor of this one. Pretty sleek, pretty stylish. And some of these disposable sticks, you get up to about the 250, 300 mark, depending on manufacturer, for amount of puffs. Your puffs can obviously vary. My puff and someone else's puff might not be the same, so that can fluctuate. And then we move into bigger models even yet. This one is an Air Bar brand disposable. Banana Ice is the flavor on that one. We have the Hyde brand disposables, a little bit larger device on the Hyde. So, you know, we start talking 200 puffs on the Joule, maybe 300 puffs on these disposables. But when we move into some of these larger ones, we're talking 500 puffs, 1,000 puffs. And I think there's a bigger one than this that's 1,500 puffs. That's pretty significant. Just another brand, we have Mr. Fogg. These ones really do blend in well as like a makeup or a beauty product, just the way they're styled and designed. But we have a grape and a rainbow flavor on those. So they're always changing. Many of these styles are probably obsolete at this point. All right, so a lot of people wonder how do kids get these, right? You're supposed to be 21, you can't buy them if you're not. There's probably a certain amount of older friends that are buying them. There's probably a certain amount of people that are just illegally selling them to youth because that's a market and they can probably profit on it. But probably the more common one is internet-based sales. And so before recently, there was kind of a big loophole in this system of traditional tobacco and cigarettes and how that was administered through the internet and sales and taxation. And so here recently, within the last few months, Congress or legislatures were able to pass and amend the PACT Act to include all vaping products. And so what that's going to do is help really limit the amount of products that can be bought online legally and shipped to consumers. So that will drive customers back to the stores and the retail establishments that sell these that hopefully can verify IDs and identities. But I mean, we can't be naive. There probably are a certain amount of people that have fake IDs that are, appearing to be 21 years of age that are buying these. And so that's really a big problem that we were seeing, though, is the internet sales. Any kid who had, that could click a button and say, yes, I am 21 years of age, and that had a payment method that were able to pay for the product and the shipping, they could get it shipped right to their house or their friend's house or wherever they desired. Parents ask, how many kids are using these? Based on data that we've collected in our own community, and that's pretty much on par with national averages. When you look at a high school population, you're talking about a third of the kids that self-report use of vaping or tobacco products. And so I'd say that's pretty consistent, probably, probably statewide with the contacts I have, that's about right. And it's self-reported survey data that we do, and it's good information. So that gives you a little bit of insight of what kind of problem we have with vaping in our youth population. That's pretty much all I got for you. I could talk for hours about this stuff, and I do travel and I do presentations to anybody that wants a presentation on vaping. That's part of my job, and I'll do that gladly. But check out the other links that are posted, do some research, be well educated, and help you make some good decisions about vaping and your youth.